like Bryce Young had a bad situation, CJ Stroud had a great situation, and it's only gotten better this year.
I think if they chose, Anthony Richardson could become a 1,000-yard rusher in the league. I think he does it. I think he gets there with Shane Steichen this year. All right, Sam, today we're talking about second-year quarterbacks. What could go well, what might not go so well. Ceilings and floors for all the second-year QBs. Let's start at the top of last year's draft with Bryce Young. Not a good rookie season for Bryce Young. In fact, one of the worst in recent history. So how could Bryce Young turn it around, reach a ceiling, and what happens if it looks, like last year?
Yeah, well, unfortunately now we've seen what the floor looks like. The floor is now catastrophic for Bryce Young, and it's that we just get a continuation of what we saw in his rookie season, which was pretty terrible. I mean, there were very, very few signs of life or optimism or, flashes of brilliance. There were occasional ones, but not much to hang your hat on if you're a Bryce Young fan or a Panthers fan. But I do still think that the ceiling is still pretty high. Number one, those flashes were there. But number two, look at a guy like Tua Tagovailoa at Miami, right? Disastrous early on in his career. And then we saw him completely turn it around once the situation around him improved. And that's a huge part of the Carolina thing last season. People got fired at the end of that season. It was a bad situation, top to bottom, around Bryce Young. And obviously, he did very little to elevate it and to make it a better situation. But I think Tua demonstrates the ceiling can still be incredibly high. Bryce Young at Alabama, I think, was better than Tua and better in the same kinds of areas. Anticipation, throwing across the middle, reading those kinds of plays and route concepts. So I think we still have a very high ceiling for Bryce Young. It's just that the floor is so much lower than maybe we thought coming into his NFL career.
The concerns I have for Bryce Young, you used the Tua comp. For me, I'm thinking back to the worst and most uncomfortable rookie seasons that we've seen. And guys like Jared Goff in 2016 and Blaine Gabbert in 2011, those are the two guys that come to mind. Some very uncomfortable, like you said, very, very few positives. But a guy like Goff did come out of it, and he came out of it in year two, much like Tua. Took year three for Tua. I guess my concern with the Panthers, though, is the situation good enough? It seemed like only Adam Thielen was dependable last year, but especially on third downs. Now you add Deontay Johnson to the mix. You had Xavier Legette in the first round. I think the guy that pulls it all together is new head coach Dave Canales. So I have some confidence that Bryce Young will come out of it. Canales is the guy that has been right there for Geno Smith turning his career around and Baker Mayfield turning his career around. So I think he is the guy to put Bryce Young in the right position. Canales knows how to play to the strengths of his receiving core as well. They also draft Jonathan Brooks as a running back in the second round. I think the Panthers, they might not have what the Dolphins had for Tua as far as playmakers go by year three, but they're moving in the right direction. Bryce Young is going to show signs of life this year. If he doesn't, though, the Panthers are back to the drawing board and looking for a quarterback again next season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the one thing that's consistent with all those quarterbacks that had as bad a season as Bryce Young did and turned it around is the situation around them fundamentally changed. Jared Goff, all those guys, and that is the case for Carolina. They've done work at receiver, done work on the offensive line, brought in an offensive-minded head coach, and added running back talent. So everything should be better than Bryce Young than it was last season, and it needs to be.
All right, let's go to the second overall pick. It was CJ Stroud. And let's not get caught up in revisionist history here, Sam. It's not like everybody was saying, you Panthers, you're stupid. You drafted the wrong guy. You drafted Bryce Young instead of CJ Stroud. We all knew CJ Stroud was the guy. That was not the case. The consensus, far more people had Bryce Young over CJ Stroud, but clearly Stroud would have been the right pick to this point, right? Stroud had one of the best rookie seasons we've ever seen. He elevates the Houston Texans, make a little playoff run, and now they're set up for even more based off some of their offseason moves. So I think we haven't seen the ceiling for Stroud, but we saw high-end play from Stroud as a rookie and things in his arsenal that maybe he only showed in flashes at Ohio State and was doing for the majority of his rookie season. What could Stroud build upon here in year two, and also what could go wrong and maybe have him come back down to earth?
Yeah, I mean, I think what can go wrong is we saw in college that, if he doesn't have that kind of Georgia playoff game where he looks spectacular under pressure, it can look a little bit worse. If he's forced to play under duress a bit more. He can make mistakes. He just didn't last season and didn't in that critical college playoff game. So the only real concern is, what if last year was just variance? And sometimes guys can catch the high end of variance for like a whole year and it unravels a little bit next year and we get the low end of that. He would look significantly worse. But like Bryce Young had a bad situation, CJ Stroud had a great situation, and it's only gotten better this year. They kept Bobby Slowick as offense coordinator, gave him a little pay bump, kept him in the building. They brought in Stephon Diggs to only add riches to that receiving core. They're getting Tank Dell back healthy. They've made some strides on the offensive line, so he should have a fantastic situation yet again. I think the floor for CJ Stroud is incredibly high. Like, I think based off last season, it's difficult to imagine him not playing pretty well next year, almost regardless of what happens. And then I think the ceiling is sky high based off last season. I mean, he showed basically no limitations to his game. He's got the physical tools you want. He's got an arm. He's got athleticism. He's got the current meta system in terms of that Shanahan system, that offense that can be as productive and as successful as anything in football. And the situation around him, as we said, is spectacular. So, year two could conceivably see CJ Stroud put himself amongst the elite quarterbacks in the NFL.
Yeah, I completely agree. I want to discuss the floor really quickly, because there was a point in the season last year, I thought Stroud early on looked very good, comfortable in the pocket, comfortable going through reads, and incredibly accurate. But then there was a point where you always mentioned that Georgia game, and where he was making plays outside of structure. He started doing that consistently week in, week out in the NFL. I think the only way that he regresses is if Stroud gets too caught up in making the spectacular play outside of structure. There were points in the season last year where that showed up. He is at his best going through reads, working progressions, throwing the ball accurately, especially at the intermediate level. If he gets a little bit too caught up in the spectacular plays, I think we could see Stroud maybe take a step back. I don't expect that, though. I think he has found the good balance of working within the system, as you said, premier system in the NFL. And then when things break down and when he needs to roll out, make a play, CJ Stroud showed that he could do it. He showed it in the Georgia game, carried it through the season last year. I agree that the ceiling is sky high. And I think Stroud, at the end of the season, we're talking about him, not necessarily in the Mahomes stratosphere, but in that second tier of top-notch quarterbacks, your Josh Allens, your Joe Burrows, your Lamar Jacksons, Jordan Love maybe. So CJ Stroud's ceiling is absolutely sky high. All right, the number 4 overall pick was Anthony Richardson. We didn't get to see much of Richardson. 4 starts, only completed 2 of those starts. But when we talk about high ceilings, that is why Anthony Richardson was picked at number 4 overall. Of course, he missed most of last season with a shoulder injury. So, Sam, what does the ceiling look like for Anthony Richardson? And, of course, the floor, I guess, is more injuries and just no development from a developmental prospect.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ceiling is still, sky high. He was being talked about as a potential number 1 overall pick, conceivably, because of the ceiling, right? He's a ball of clay, but literally the most athletic quarterback that's ever entered the NFL based off size and speed and all those kinds of things. The strongest arm in that draft class, an athletic specimen, and smarter and sort of more sophisticated from a passing, pocket managing quarterback than you would imagine him to be, given how young and inexperienced he is as a starting quarterback. So all of that remains the case after 4 games. We saw some really high level play from him, and the athleticism and the size, all those things are still there. So the ceiling remains exactly where it was a year ago. But I do think that the floor is more, maybe not worse than it was, because the floor was always like, it doesn't work. The athleticism, the potential simply isn't realized, and he's just not a good quarterback. But I think the risk now is he played in 4 games and was knocked out of 2 of them with injuries, one of which was a serious season-ending, shut-him-down type of injury. And for a guy who you need to have the run game, you need to have that athleticism and that size and physical gifts in his arsenal, in his golf bag. Otherwise, what's the point in Anthony Richardson, right? It's like Josh Allen. If you're not going to lean in to the fact that he's bigger, stronger, faster than most of the guys trying to bring him down, you lose something special that makes him Josh Allen. The same thing is true with Anthony Richardson, and he was hurt twice in 4 games. So do the Colts look at that and say, we need to cut out a whole swathe of this playbook because it doesn't work now. We're exposing our quarterback to too many hits and too much injury risk. We've got to get rid of that. If they do, then I think Richardson's potential is diminished a bit. It's cut. There's a percentage of it cut off. Or do they simply say, look, we got unlucky. 2 injuries happened in 4 weeks. It's probably not happening again. He is who he is still. Let's lean into that. And the upside is still special. So I think the concern is that those 2 injuries fundamentally change what they have planned for Anthony Richardson, and it limits what he can be now.
Yeah, the floor, I think, is pretty clear. It is that they either limit the run game, or Anthony Richardson remains injury-prone, or he just doesn't develop as a passer. As you said, he wants to sit in the pocket and make throws. He just missed a higher percentage than the other prospects last year when he was at Florida. Last year, he still had elements of the inaccuracy, a couple bad decisions in there, but we didn't. Those are normal rookie mistakes that we didn't get to see Richardson grow out of. We only saw, those 2 full starts basically last season. But the ceiling that you mentioned is sky high. If they can continue to run the ball, I think if they chose, Anthony Richardson could become a 1,000-yard rusher in the league. He's that good. You could run him 8 to 12 times a game and run an effective offense. And I think the QB running game opens up those open passes. They open up the rest of the field. That mitigates the accuracy. I think all of that potential is there for Anthony Richardson. And then hopefully the accuracy develops. And you're always banking on a Josh Allen type of move. Those are rare, but Josh Allen goes from one of the most inaccurate quarterbacks in the league after 2 years to one of the most accurate in years 3 and beyond. And I think that is what the ceiling looks like for Richardson, because the athleticism isn't just, can you run fast on the field? Are you big and strong? It's also, can you make mechanical changes, and can you change and improve from an accuracy standpoint? I do think Richardson has all those tools, and that's the ceiling is still sky high for him. And I think he does it. I think he gets there with Shane Steichen this year. All right, let's go. Second round quarterback Will Levis. He was talked about in the first round, but he ends up going in the second. And I think of all the teams this offseason building around their year 2 starter, I think, has anyone done it better than the Titans, bringing in Calvin Ridley, bringing in Tyler Boyd? You have dynamism coming out of the backfield with Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears. What are your expectations for Will Levis here in year 2?
And a new coaching staff with a proven sort of offensive line-minded specialist coming over to really hopefully improve what has been the worst offensive line in the NFL for 2 straight years. Look, I have to stick with the Will Levis love. I had him as my second-ranked quarterback that year. I really like his potential. I think, and we saw that potential last year. He came in and immediately completely transformed what that offense looked like. Now, it didn't sustain. It went off the rails a little bit. But again, like Bryce Young, terrible situation. Not much in the way of receivers outside of Nuke Hopkins, and the worst offensive line in the NFL, which kind of offset or negated what Derrick Henry could do if he had a good offensive line in front of him. So Levis should be better this year because, again, the situation around him should be significantly better. The physical tools are there. Like, he's big, he's strong, he's more athletic than maybe he's given credit for, and he's got an incredible arm, both in terms of strength, velocity, and release, like lightning quick release, can just fire the ball where he wants it. The risk is, like, what if he's just jacked Gardner Minshew or Jameis Winston, right? This guy that's wildly streaky and completely insane. And as fun as that is to watch, like absolute primetime blockbuster entertainment, it's not necessarily the most effective way of playing the game. Like, the old Levis copter on first down to gain 3 yards is probably not an ideal strategy on a down-to-down basis.
Football insane, of course, Sam. I mean, you mentioned Jameis Winston. I was hitching my wagon to Jameis every single year because of how aggressive he was throwing the ball down the field. That was Will Levis. He was chucking it last year. Sometimes to his own team, sometimes to the other team. And I think when you do have those playmakers with DeAndre Hopkins, with Calvin Ridley as a true number 2, and Tyler Boyd working out of the slot, I do think they have the weapons to be explosive on offense. So I think the ceiling for Levis is that aggressiveness meshes with a good group of receivers. Hopefully the offensive line is better. Bill Callahan coming in as an offensive line coach should help that right away. The floor, though, it's low. I think it's a similar floor to Anthony Richardson. It's the aggressive play working against you. You're turning the ball over and just not making enough big plays to offset that. So I think the range of outcomes for Levis is wide, but I do think he's in position to maybe reach that ceiling or at least show enough to the Titans that he's the guy to build around because they've put him in really good position to show that this year, here in year 2.
Yeah, I mean, the floor is Blaine Gabbert, right? It's like you're just not a starting caliber quarterback, but you're probably going to hang around on a roster for a decade because you've got all the physical tools to do it.
All right, let's touch on Aidan O'Connell, the other year 2 quarterback who has a chance to start and started a bunch of games last year. I mean, depending on the week, Sam, there were games where Aidan O'Connell looked great. There were games where he didn't look so great. That's kind of what the scouting report was coming out of Purdue for O'Connell. So is there a future for Aidan O'Connell as a starter in the NFL?
Yeah, wildly inconsistent quarterback. And even if you watch his college tape, like if you watch the high end, his highlight reel was as good as any quarterback in that draft class. It was just that the low light reel was also equally as spectacular in a completely different way. I almost feel like his ceiling is like Ryan Fitzpatrick. You know, can he be a perennially streaky quarterback that's like borderline caliber starter, but when he catches the high end of variance, you can go on a 4 or 5 game streak where he's really good, right? Where he just puts the ball up, lets guys like Devontae Adams goes and makes plays, and the Raiders offense looks fantastic. It's just that the bad runs, when you catch the bad end of variance, you get moved on from. Like the team says, all right, that's enough of that. And they get rid of him and he has to go to his 17th team in 12 years or whatever Ryan Fitzpatrick finally managed to make it through. Also, like Ryan Fitzpatrick, he's got his own little facial hair gimmick, right? Fitzpatrick grew out the bushy beard. Aidan O'Connell's got the mustache. So I think that's his ceiling, is we can be the new age Ryan Fitzpatrick. Ultimately, the floor is, you know, again, the bench. The floor is, that's enough of you, Aidan. Thanks for your service. Now take a seat.
The floor is what people thought Ryan Fitzpatrick was going to be, which was just maybe a backup. I love that comp. I think the ceiling of Ryan Fitzpatrick as a spot starter who could go on a run, love that for Aidan O'Connell. Don't know if he'll be able to do that with the Raiders here, but throw into Devontae Adams. They do have a good group there. Brock Bowers coming in here. I do think they have the opportunity to give him chances to throw the ball down the field, hit the high end of variance, like a good Fitzmagic type of season. So yeah, love that ceiling for O'Connell. And as you said, the floor is pretty clear. He's a career backup. All right, Sam, out of all the quarterbacks, who is most likely to reach that ceiling? Let's take CJ Stroud out of it. We've already seen him play at a high level. He's on his path to maybe becoming an elite quarterback. But of the other 4, which of these second-year quarterbacks has the best chance of reaching their ceiling?
Well, based off what their ceilings were, I think that there's an actually pretty good chance that Aidan O'Connell can become the new age Ryan Fitzpatrick. You know, I think that's an achievable target for Aidan. Like, he's going to get the starting job there for the Raiders. That's there to be won for him. And, you know, that he can go on a run. We already saw that last season. He played individual games that were very, very good. He's got the receiving talent there to just, you know, close his eyes, YOLO, and fire that ball downfield and put up some plays, vintage Fitzpatrick style. So AOC, Aidan O'Connell is going to be the new Ryan Fitzpatrick.
All right, I'm going to go with Bryce Young having the best chance to reach his ceiling. We talked about Tua being the guy maybe that he could look to as what does coming out of this slump, say, look like. I think Bryce Young has the best chance. The other first-round picks in history that have done it, Jared Goff, a little bit of Matthew Stafford. Alex Smith was really rough as a number 1 overall pick. But once you get the pieces around him, I think Bryce Young will look like the natural playmaker that he was at Alabama. Natural feel as a passer. He had the inside the pocket. He had the outside the pocket magic. Bryce Young just looked a little overwhelmed as a rookie because of the system, the playmakers around him. All that's changed. I think Bryce Young has a chance to turn things around and become a very good starter in the NFL.